Okay, so I am here in Hong Kong because my friends Johnny and Yuk are about to get married, and I get the great honor of being able to speak at their wedding. But before I go and do, I wanted to fill you in on just 4 interesting bits of information about Martin Luther's wedding that you may not have known. First of all, Martin Luther, the great reformer 500 years ago, he married a renegade nun. It was a group of nuns that had discovered the writings of Martin Luther, so they turned their backs on their nunnery and escaped and came to Martin Luther and his town for help. So he was an ex-monk and she was an ex-nun, and they married, and it created all sorts of scandal. Secondly, she was an intellect of her own. She was a von. She was from a higher class German family, and so she was quite well educated, and so she helped Luther in his Reformation. She wrote things of her own. In fact, there were quite a few educated women that were involved in the Reformation. Sometimes we skip over them. We sometimes think that women weren't educated or didn't play a role in academia or in the life of the intellectual life of a country until feminism came, but not true. Martin Luther's wife was a great intellect, along with many other women, and contributed to the Reformation. Number 3, and this may be a little scandalous, Martin Luther and his wife Katrina, they had sex before their wedding. That's right, Martin Luther, the great reformer, and his wife Katrina had sex before their wedding, but that was very normal back then. It was part of the marriage ceremony. They were expected to. The way marriage and weddings went back then is you would go and sign the legal papers with some witnesses. Then you would consummate the marriage so that you were legally married by having sex. And then only after that would you go to have a celebration at a church where you celebrated the fact that you were married, and a wedding was a celebration of your marriage. So you had sex before the wedding at the church. A lot of people do that today, but perhaps for different reasons. And perhaps the most scandalous of all, number 4, when Martin Luther first had sex with his wife, someone else was in the room watching. Martin asked his best friend Jonas to be in the room and watch him and his bride have sex. Now you might think, well, Martin Luther was a big pervert, having his friend in there to watch him, bang his ex-nun renegade wife, for the very first time. Well, not really, because everybody did that way back then. You see, the consummation of the marriage needed a legal witness. So whenever the first time any married couple had sex, there had to be someone in the room watching to make sure the deed was done, so he could say, yes, they are officially married, and then they could have the wedding. How many of you are really glad your best man or bridesmaid, you didn't have a couple of friends there the very first time you did it? Probably a fair number of you. Maybe that's a tradition that should stay an old tradition. Okay, those are 4 things on Martin Luther's wedding. Hope you're having a good week. Later.